Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into something, well, fascinating but also quite challenging. EU citizenship by descent. It's become super popular, hasn't it?
Okay.
Especially for people in the Americas with roots back in Europe.
Definitely. Lots of interest there.
But the article we're looking at today, it's called, Does EU Citizenship by Descent Create More Inequality in Human Value Against Racialized Communities?
Right.
By Gaynor-Fray. It asks a really tough question.
It really does.
So our mission, basically, is to unpack how the citizenship works, look at the obvious benefits, but then really question why it seems like not everyone gets an equal shot at it.
Right.
This might shift how you think about history and, well, privilege today.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, because on the surface, getting that EU citizenship through your family tree seems straightforward, maybe like just claiming your heritage.
Yeah, simple paperwork, maybe.
Well, maybe not simple paperwork, but conceptually simple. But this article argues it actually shines a light on much bigger historical inequalities, things that are still affecting who gets what today.
And the EU benefits are huge, right? That's the draw.
Absolutely. You're talking great social programs, healthcare, education. It's very appealing.
Yeah.
So looking at who can actually get access and who can't becomes, well, critical.
Okay, that critical lens is important. So before we get into the inequality part, let's just make sure everyone's clear. What is EU citizenship by descent? How does it actually work?
Okay, so basically a lot of EU countries and even some European nations outside the EU let you claim citizenship if you can prove you had an ancestor from there.
To prove your roots.
Exactly. It usually means digging up documents, tracing your family line back, sometimes quite a few generations.
Any examples?
Sure. Italy's a big one. They're known for potentially allowing it no matter how many generations back, provided the line wasn't broken, legally speaking.
Wow, no limit.
Pretty much, if the conditions are met. Ireland and Poland are others where people apply, even if their family left, centuries ago.
So it could be a great-great-great-grandparent, not just parents.
That's right. It can be quite distant. And the payoff is significant. We're talking full access to EU social systems, healthcare, often free or much cheaper higher education.
Yeah, the big one, work rights.
Yes, the right to live and work anywhere in all 27 EU countries. It's a massive door opener.
Okay, those benefits sound, frankly, life-changing for many. But the article's title brings us back to inequality. So where does that critical lens focus when we ask who gets these advantages?
Right, that's the core of it. Because those benefits are huge, but Gaynor-Fray's argument, the central one, is that actually claiming this citizenship through ancestry, it's way less accessible for communities of color in the Americas.
Specifically?
Particularly people of African descent and indigenous peoples. And it's not random, the article argues. It stems from, really deep historical and systemic issues.
Okay, what's the main one?
The biggest factor is probably historical displacement and disconnection.
Okay, historical displacement.
Yeah.
How does that actually block someone today trying to find their European ancestor?
Well, just think about it. Millions of Africans forcibly brought over during the slave trade, ripped from their homes, their cultures, their records.
Complete severance.
Complete severance. And at the same time, millions of indigenous people here in the Americas were displaced, killed, or forced to assimilate by colonizers.
Also cut off from their history.
Exactly. These communities were systematically cut off from their ancestral roots, not just physically, but culturally, socially. So trying to trace lineage back to a specific European nation, it's often just impossible. They lack the starting point.
Whereas European descendants?
Well, their ancestors were often the colonizers or settlers. They generally maintained those links back to Europe, kept records, passed down knowledge. It creates this legacy, maybe unintentional now, but it still privileges them in this specific way.
Wow. Okay, so the very act of colonization created this divide in who can even begin the search.
Precisely. And then there's another layer. Systemic discrimination in the actual records.
How so?
Even if someone from a community of color could theoretically trace a European line somewhere way back, the way history was recorded or erased makes it incredibly difficult.
For instance?
Well, think about Latin America and the Caribbean. You had classifications like mestizo, mulatto, pardos. These were labels for mixed heritage.
Right. I've seen those terms in historical documents.
They often obscured any specific European ancestry. The records just wouldn't list a clear origin nation for that part of someone's heritage. It got blended, categorized away.
So the labels themselves wiped out the detail needed now.
In many cases, yes. Plus, basic documents, birth certificates, family registers, these were often lost, destroyed, or just plain wrong, especially for enslaved people or other marginalized groups.
So no paper trail.
Often, no reliable paper trail. These communities were effectively excluded from having that documented elite European heritage that you need for these citizenship claims. They just don't have the same access to precise records or even the genealogical knowledge that others might take for granted.
That makes the barrier seem almost insurmountable for many. And this leads straight into economic differences too, right?
It does, absolutely. Like we said, EU citizenship means better healthcare, maybe free college, way more job options.
Huge economic advantages.
Huge. So for people of color in the Americas, especially those already facing economic hardship, not having access to this route is like another layer of inequality piled on.
An extra barrier.
Exactly. While someone else might leverage their European ancestry for, say, moving abroad for work or study, getting that safety net, others just don't have an equivalent option based on their ancestry. It just reinforces existing cycles of inequality. It's a structural thing.
The structural advantage for some based purely on who their ancestors were and how history treated them.
That's what the article argues, yes.
And the article also mentions cultural and political implications. What's meant by that? It sounds a bit more abstract.
Well, think about the symbolism. Gaynor-Fray suggests that when claiming European ancestry grants these huge privileges, it subtly reinforces a kind of hierarchy.
A hierarchy where European equals.
Where whiteness or European origin is sort of equated with more value, more legitimacy, more access. The implication, intended or not, is that your worth or potential is linked to being able to trace back to Europe.
And that devalues other identities.
It can implicitly devalue the citizenship and identity of communities who can't make those claims, even in their own home countries. It can feed into feelings of alienation, like you're less connected to global opportunity, especially if power and wealth in your own society are already held by those who can leverage European ties.
That's a really profound point.
Yeah.
How these historical threads weave into modern identity and access. Okay, so bringing this wider, what does this mean for other countries shaped by colonization? The article mentions the New World, Canada, Mexico, the US, Chile, Argentina, the UK. How does citizenship work differently there, and do we see similar issues?
Yeah, it's interesting. These countries, while different, all grapple with colonial legacies that often advantage European descendants in subtle and not so subtle ways, including citizenship access.
Let's take Canada first.
Canada. Their main path isn't really descent-based for most immigrants now. It's residency, language skills, economic contribution. But it's expensive. It takes time.
And historically?
Historically, it definitely favored European immigrants. Even now, systems like express entry with points for education and funds can be tougher hurdles for people from marginalized groups like Afro-descendants or Indigenous people from poorer backgrounds.
So less about ancestry, more about current resources, which can still reflect historical disadvantage.
Exactly. Now, Mexico has paths through descent or naturalization, but naturalizing often requires showing financial stability, and there's bureaucracy costs.
And for Indigenous or Afro-Mexican groups?
Well, again, proving specific ancestry can be hard because of those historical record issues we talked about. Systemic exclusion plays a role.
Okay. The U.S.?
The U.S. is mainly birthright citizenship or naturalization, which is, again, costly and complex. For African Americans, Native Americans, the history of slavery, displacement, broken treaties makes tracing European lines incredibly difficult, if not impossible for most. The required proof just isn't there.
Right. What about down in South America? Chile, Argentina?
Similar stories, according to the source. They have routes via residency or descent, but those legacies of racial inequality, they're still potent. Indigenous and Afro-descendant communities often face discrimination, lack resources, making it harder to navigate the system or meet requirements.
That seems like a consistent pattern.
It does. And finally, the UK. They do offer some citizenship by descent, but it's generally less broad than many EU countries, and even with Britain's vast colonial history.
You'd think there'd be more links.
You might, but for many Indigenous and Afro-descendant people in the Americas, the kind of mobility a UK passport offers is still out of reach. Their historical ties were often ones of subjugation, not the kind that created pathways to citizenship later on. Those links were often deliberately cut.
So across the board in these New World nations, historical factors keep creating barriers, even if the laws look neutral now.
That seems to be the argument, yes.
Given all this, these deep issues, what does Gaynor-Fray propose? How can we start to address these imbalances or maybe rethink citizenship and ancestry?
Well, the article really positions this whole trend of seeking EU citizenship by descent as a stark reminder of colonialism's long shadow and these ongoing racial
This
disparities.
puts it front and center.
Exactly. To tackle it, the source suggests a few things. One idea is for countries in the Americas to adopt more inclusive ancestry laws themselves. Meaning, for example, maybe countries like Brazil, with huge populations of African descent, could explore ways for people to gain residency or citizenship based on those ancestral ties, recognizing the historical connections back to African nations or indigenous communities.
So broaden the definition of relevant ancestry beyond just Europe.
Precisely. Another big one is really acknowledging the historical displacement. This could mean things like reparative justice measures, maybe through expanded migration or citizenship opportunities, to try and rectify those past wrongs that cut people off.
Reparations through citizenship pathways.
Potentially, or related migration policies. And finally, there's a call for much greater investment in education and preserving historical records for marginalized communities, helping people access and prove their own histories, whatever they may be.
Empowering people to reclaim those lost connections.
Yes, bridging those historical gaps where possible.
This has been incredibly insightful. It really shows how something like EU citizenship by descent, which seems like a personal journey of discovering roots, is tangled up in huge historical forces.
Definitely.
Historical displacement, messed up records, economic gaps, cultural biases, they all feed into why access isn't equal.
And it does raise that provocative question Gaynor-Fray puts forward, doesn't it? If an EU passport wasn't such a golden ticket, if it didn't grant quite so much extra privilege compared to others,
Then maybe claiming it through descent wouldn't feel so unequal or contentious.
perhaps. The article points out this complex dynamic where, for someone who is white and has American citizenship, that's already seen as a lot of privilege, right?
Right.
Yet getting another layer of privilege through EU ancestry is perfectly legal. It's not against the rules. It just highlights these disparities in a really stark way.
It absolutely does. A lot to think about there. We really encourage you, the listener, to mull over these connections between history, identity, and access today. How do these old legacies still shape who gets what opportunities around the world?
It's a question worth asking.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gave you some new perspectives, and we look forward to exploring another complex topic with you next time.